Culture Yearbook. Thank you for listening. On this show, we pick pieces of pop culture that were important to us in a given year. We then discuss those, dig into those movies,
my
albums,
God.
shows, and more. Yeah, I switched
Oh
it
my
up, and I
God.
just knew you get
We've
lost.
done this almost 100 times,
know.
and you
But
still
you know
cannot
the
get it
drill,
right.
and if you're just
You
listening
know what
to
it
this
is?
for the first time, we talk about movies and stuff, and tonight we're talking about some other stuff too.
And more.
And it's stuff that we liked from a certain year, so we'll get the intro just right next time again.
I hit her.
And
That's
who are
what
you?
it's exactly like.
I did not.
I did not. If you've never seen the movie,
Pete's quoting The Room.
Yeah.
Escapes me. Yeah, it's from The Room, but it's actually the funny scene from
The Disaster.
Disaster Artist, where they kept recreating it because you could never ever get the line right after like 100 times, and so that's why I was going there with Brad.
I see.
I kind of figured
exactly
it out.
the same.
Kind of a deep one. All right, so we started with some music last week. Pretty much nailed that one, right, guys?
Oh man, that
for
was
sure.
yeah.
And now we're gonna go on a little bit different direction. Pete's got a plan for us tonight, and tell him what it is.
You know, Brad, if you ever get the intro right,
a good editor of the podcast would just have me do it once, and they would just cut it in every time.
I'm sure they would, but in the ones you do well, you always end with what?
And more.
And more.
Yes. So this is one of the and more episodes. We're always looking for new ideas on Pop Culture Yearbook. We enjoy doing the music and movies and TV that we usually do.
And
but
it's still pop culture related.
It's still pop culture, but occasionally you got to throw something else in there, right? And so we're going to do something a little different tonight. We're going to be talking about comics. Because that was definitely a very important part of my life growing up. And
comic
the reason
strips.
that we're
Yes, not Jerry Seinfeld
strips,
or
whatever.
Not stand-up comics.
Oh yeah, good. Thank you for the clarification. Comic strips, like newspaper comic strips, the funnies,
What's
the
a
Sunday
newspaper?
funnies that you always used to get. And yeah, right. But the reason that we're picking it this month is because this month we're doing Gifford, give it to me.
In the year 2000.
Perfectly done. On key and everything. Loved it.
That was pretty good. But he is the singer of the group. He's done solos.
Yes, he's yes.
Not just singing.
Sadly, the reason we're doing it this month, because in the year 2000, the person who I would consider the godfather of comic strips, the person that probably was the main influence for almost every comic strip writer that's out there, especially today, and the crown jewel of all of the comics is Peanuts, which was, of course, written by Charles Schulz. And we have a local angle because
I was going to say, where is he from?
He was born in Minneapolis on November 26, 1922, and he grew up in St. Paul. And so he is one of us, a local Minnesotan, and that's why if you do go over to St. Paul, you see all the and really around town, you'll see the Charlie Brown character statues and stuff like that. That's why we had for a while Camp Snoopy at the Mall of
Planet
America.
Snoopy.
And Planet Snoopy,
in Valley Fair.
Yes. So all kinds of local angles there. So sadly, he died on February 12th, 2000. Which, by the way, it's almost the anniversary. It's
February 1st today. Hang on now. What day is the 12th?
The day of.
No, it won't come out on the 12th. It'll come out on the 20th.
Yeah,
but pretty darn close.
Yeah, and so he died suddenly of a heart attack at age 77 at his home in Santa Rosa, California. The comics are still in syndication. They don't make any Peanuts because there's no other artist that is allowed to draw Peanuts. And so interesting little fact there. So anybody have anything to throw in there about Charles Schulz himself? a couple more points
Well,
here.
not any like specific research I did, but I'll just say that I still read the Peanuts comic strip just about every day. It's in the newspaper still every day. I don't read the newspaper itself, but I read like an online version, and it's there. And we know, if you've listened to the show before, we did a whole episode that revolved around cartoon Halloween specials and the Great Pumpkin. We also have a lost episode where we talked about the Charlie Brown Christmas episode. And so the cartoons are great. The comic strips are great. But very important part of my life and my upbringing was the Peanut specials on TV. And they had a huge influence on me. And obviously Charles Schulz was integral in those.
Well, and as a young boy growing up, you know how you've got like your teddy bear or whatever that you sleep with at night. I also had a Snoopy character, a Snoopy plush toy, and it came with another smaller Snoopy, and like the bigger one's hands were like attached with Velcro at the ends, and it could like hug the little one. And then that was one of the plush toys that I had growing up as a young child.
I also had a Snoopy.
Did you? Cool. So yeah, definitely.
People don't know this, but I actually had a dog named Snoopy.
I did not know that. Why wouldn't I know that?
Well, on the farm, it was only until I was probably 4 years old or so, but we had it was a black and white dog, and his name was Snoopy. And then it was out on the farm and outside most of the time. And one day he just disappeared, and we don't know what happened to him.
Maybe he took off on his plain doghouse.
Yeah, the Red Baron.
Yeah, that could be.
Or maybe he went to meet Spike in Arizona in the desert.
Could have done that.
Yeah. So, one thing I do want to add, kind of a little fun fact. I can't say that it was on his deathbed or anything, because from what I read, Schulz died suddenly. But it sounds like it was later in his life, as he was kind of looking back on all that he'd accomplished and everything. One quote that he said was he was recounting the moment when he signed one of his final strips, and a thought occurred to him. He says, his quote was, "All of a sudden I thought, that poor kid, he never even got to kick the football. What a dirty trick. He never had a chance to kick that football." And so that was one of his regrets about the whole thing. And so he, of course, had Lucy, that little bitch, was always pulling that football away.
And that's a quote by Charles Schulz.
Fell for it every little bitch. That would have been amazing.
But that Charlie Brown in that football is a great metaphor also for us here, because there's a terrific little one-panel cartoon of Charlie Brown in the air missing the football wearing a Vikings helmet that comes out every time they lose an NFC Championship game, which happens a lot in our lifetime.
It sure does.
And we haven't seen it, and they haven't won, and maybe it's a curse of Charles Schulz.
It is. It really is. As a Vikings fan, we all, as Vikings fans, are like Charlie Brown. We keep getting our hopes up.
We do. Just like his baseball, every year he thinks he's going to be good and win, and he's all excited on the mound. And the next thing you know, his clothes get blown off by a
ball that
by a line drive
back up the middle. Yep.
I think we've all had that happen, but to us.
Actually, no.
Okay, never mind. Carry on. All right.
I so being naked on a pitcher's mound at one point in high school, but probably for a different reason.
Do you picture that a lot? What?
No, I don't.
I'm trying to remember that one.
If you told me it happened, I would be like, yep, that's probably about right.
We're going to have to explore that a little bit. Let's unpack that before we get into the meat of the show.
Yeah. Either Gifford or Jimmy Norgard.
Brad is both together?
No.
All right. Okay. So as I was thinking about how are we going to do this episode, because usually it's so easy to make assignments for what we're going to do. Usually if we pick a movie, we all just go watch the movie, we write our notes, we come back. But comics are a little different. So it's like, do I try to go find a Sunday paper and have everybody read that, or what am I going to do here? So what I came up with is that we each go off on our own. We find, like 3 to 5 or whatever you guys came up with, a few comic strips from any source that you want. And we're going to read them on the air, panel by panel.
And you're going to imagine these things in your head, and you're going to like it.
We are going to paint a picture.
It's going to be amazing. This, yes, I guarantee you, has never been done before in podcasting history.
It's going to be the most visual podcast in the history of podcasts.
If somebody can come up with a podcast where they've done that, please at us on Twitter. Mm-hmm. Because that would be amazing. I would love to hear it. So with that, let's start with Gifford. We're gonna take turns here. Okay. So you'll read one comic, and then we'll go around until you run out, and we just kind of go through the rest of them.
We don't know what each other has picked, so I'm curious to hear what did Gifford pick for a comic? What did he like?
All right.
Where did he find?
By the way, I just wanted to also, before we get into it, I want to say that you could pick any criteria that you wanted. You could pick ones that were funny. You could pick ones that were just so stupid it shouldn't have even been printed. And it stands out that way because there's a lot of that.
Like the Family Circus.
I'm talking to you, Family Circus fans. Yes. Or if something hit you emotionally, you could talk about that. Any reason at all. So, all right, take it away, boys.
All right, so my first one that I picked 2 comics each from 3 different lines. So I'm going to start with One of My Peanuts. And this one, to me, just kind of encapsulates poor Charlie Brown throughout his life. So this one I found, supposedly it was published in the paper August 2nd of 1988. And it's just a quick little 3-panel. It's got Marcy and Charlie Brown sitting on a blanket out on the beach. They're having a little picnic.
Got a picture in my head.
Yep.
You're doing a great job.
Marcy's wearing a sexy little 2-piece.
Really? Marcy?
Yep, Marcy.
Like you're serious?
Yep. Yes,
wow.
I believe
I didn't
so.
see that coming.
Oh, okay, sir.
Yes, exactly. Well said. So, Marcy.
I'd picture her as a 1-piece.
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure it's a 2.
I would have thought so too.
Huh. So we got Marcy. She's opening up. They're both holding fortune cookies. So they're at their end of their picnic here. And Marcy says, "I love fortune cookies. Don't you, Charles?"
Yes, she's always very formal.
Mm-hmm. Second panel with just Marcy in it. She's reading what's in her fortune cookie. Mine says, "You will have a happy day." What does yours say? So our final panel has our hero, Charlie Brown. He has unfurled the piece of paper in his fortune cookie, and he reads, "We're sorry, but we're not in now. If you'll leave your name and number, we'll try to get back to you."
That is perfect Charlie Brown right there.
I mean, that is Charlie Brown perfectly summed up. Even his fortune cookie doesn't come with a fortune. Just a delayed gratification and an apology that things didn't quite work out for him again this time.
That was good.
Do your other Charlie Brown. Are we going to? We'll do the 3
we can
rounds.
Do that. It's fine.
Okay. So my second Charlie Brown is just 1 panel. We have 4 characters, and they are all sitting around and they are coloring. So first we have Charlie Brown. I'm moving left to right here. Charlie Brown. And then Snoopy is next to him, just watching the kids color. Then we have Linus, and the last one is Lucy.
Linus and Lucy, classic.
Mm-hmm. So Charlie Brown is sitting up, and he's reading a paper. And he says, it says here that the average child wears down 730 crayons before he or she is 10 years old. And that coloring promotes understanding and brings children closer together. Very nice sentiment right off the bat from Charlie.
I was going to say, is that it?
As we move further down in the panel, Linus is coloring at his coloring book, laying down on his stomach.
Ah, yes.
And he says, "What color should I make the sky?" To which Lucy follows up with, "Blue,
This
you
is
blockhead."
snarky. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just a wonderful where Charlie Brown's last statement is brings children closer together. And in the end, we have Lucy with the snarky comment, that
course.
bitch that she is, as
Perfectly
she continues to color on
encapsulates
her
all.
paper
And-
without looking up.
And why did you pick those two?
Well, I like the first one because it just sums up Charlie Brown's life. And the second one just kind of shows to me what I really like the relationship between just Lucy and any of the characters, because she is so just crass and always so rude, and just she was just Charlie Brown's life is bad enough the way it is, it seems, and she's always there to just put a boot on his throat or in any situation. So I like that play there. This one supposedly was published in the paper January 21st of 1994.
Well done. Hey, our graduation year. Well done.
Yes, it was. That's why I picked it. I wanted one from 94.
All
And
right.
those were years also where I was, getting the paper and reading them, from the paper at that time. So.
Am I going next?
Yes, you are, Brad.
All right. So since we're talking Charles Schulz, I have a couple of Peanuts ones as well, and I'm going to start with those, and it ties right into Gifford. So I have a bookshelf downstairs that has all my old comic books. There's like 40 Garfield books on there and others.
You ain't lying, folks.
And spoiler alert, Garfield's coming. But I came across this one that I guess I knew I had, but hadn't really put it together how perfect this was. I have a book called Peanuts 2000, which is from the year 2000 and contains the last year of comic strips of the Peanuts comic strip that Charles Schulz wrote. So I thought, well, this book is like the most perfect book you could have sitting in your home for what we're doing tonight.
A book that bookends his career.
So I looked through it, and I found one that I liked that has almost no
Closing
words.
the yearbook.
But then I'm also going to read the
And the
last one that he ever wrote, which I think kind of bookends well with the other one I picked. And this is just,
Yes.
it's just came about organically this way. I think it's great.
Oh, I love that.
So these are both Sunday comic strips, so they have a little more length to them. So the first one, Charlie Brown is by a wheelbarrow. And he puts the wheelbarrow up on its two wheels. And he's walking. These are the first two panels. And the third one, he pulls the wheelbarrow up to the mailbox, and he looks inside the mailbox. No words. The next one, the wheelbarrow is there, and he has now stuffed his face into the mailbox, which you might have seen in some of the specials on TV.
Mm-hmm.
But he's
Sure.
getting in there deep because, Charlie Brown doesn't give up. In the fifth one, he then is walking away from the mailbox with the wheelbarrow. So nothing has happened. He's just looked in the mailbox. And then he gets back, and he sits down next to Snoopy. And the empty wheelbarrow is sitting next to him. Snoopy is sitting next to him. And Charlie Brown just simply says, "No Valentines."
Oh.
And of course, Valentine's Day is just about here as well.
Yes, it is.
It'll be tomorrow, actually, from when you listen to this. No, we just had it. I'm getting the two episodes mixed up.
God.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Come
There's
on,
no
man.
there's no time in podcast land.
But I picked
There
that
isn't.
one. That one first stood out to me because I thought it's just so simple. But like you said, Gifford, with yours, it just encapsulates the soul of Charlie Brown.
Yes.
The guy who every year looks for these Valentines and always thinks he's going to get something, to the point where he takes a freaking wheelbarrow.
Not one or two.
Doesn't
He's
just
expecting
walk out.
a-
Takes a wheelbarrow.
That's the saddest comic I've ever heard.
And then just sadly comes back, and Snoopy's just looking at him, and he just says no Valentines. So it's kind of sad. But
That is
it
sad.
shows-
That's my goodness.
But
You
that's-
really
that's
brought
the-
the show down.
That's the fun of Peanuts, though, is that, regardless of how it ends, the next one, he's always optimistic and ready to go.
So now I'm going to go skip ahead to the very last Peanuts comic strip. And I kind of thought I'd want to read this one anyway, but it actually ties pretty well into the one I just shared. Again, this is a Sunday comic. In this one, we start with Charlie Brown, and he's got his hands inside the mailbox, and Oh, okay. So it's like a rag he's holding. It's like he's cleaning out the inside of the mailbox.
Which you do from time to time.
You know that because in the next one, Sally is standing next to him, his sister, and he says the inside of a mailbox should always be kept clean in case you get a love letter. Okay. Sally doesn't roll her eyes or anything. They get to the next one, and it's both Charlie and Sally just looking straight up into the air, and it's starting to rain. In the fourth panel, they are now running into their house with their hands up over their heads, and the rain is coming down pretty hard. So he cleaned out the mailbox. They're running inside. We are now inside the home, and Charlie is sitting on the big chair, and Sally is hanging off of the arm of the chair, and she says, "Aren't you going out to get the mail?" And he says, "Not while it's raining." All right. Then we see just a close-up of Charlie Brown sitting in the chair, and he says, "When it's raining, the only love letters you get are those that say, 'I never want to see you again.'" And then now Sally is laying down next to the chair, and this is the second to the last one, and she says, "You seem to know a lot about love letters." And then our final panel ever in a comic strip for this is Charlie back in his chair again, and he says, "If I ever got one, I don't know what I would do." And so even it ends with him never, like, not kicking the football.
Wow.
You know, he never got the love letter. He never talked to the red-haired girl, but he's always got these philosophies and things to say about everything. And he thinks he's got a plan, but this poor guy just never happened for him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the essence of Charlie Brown.
Yes. Well said.
So those are the two I picked.
Very nice.
All right. If you'll excuse me, I have to go call my therapist now after listening to those.
Well, that's
Is she
Charlie
in for
Brown
5 cents?
sounds like that. And there you can have a therapist in there.
Yeah.
Go talk to Lucy. She'll set you straight.
Oh my God, no, she would. No.
Well, and that's the other
All
thing
right.
that's crazy about this comic strip is that despite all the horrible things that Lucy does to Charlie Brown throughout the run of the strip, he still goes to her for psychiatric help.
He does.
Like the bane of his existence, the
See, this guy
reason
just
that he
never
probably
gives up. He never
has.
learns a lesson. Maybe Charlie Brown is just the stupidest person ever, and we should just look at
He
it.
doesn't deserve. He doesn't deserve anything.
He may be Caillou's stupider cousin, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Come on, I think we've all been there, though.
That's why it's great, because you can always relate to him, because everybody's been through it.
Yeah.
That's
and the
right.
eternal optimist that
Especially
Charlie Brown
us.
is. Yeah. All right, Pete.
All right, should I go now? Peanuts was obviously always right up there and a classic, but I remember growing up, getting a Marshall paper, and I would care about two things. It was always the sports and the comics. I didn't care about the news, and I kind of wish I still felt that way. But the first ones that I would go to was not Peanuts, but the one that I would always think was the most laugh out loud funniest of all of them was BC.
Okay.
I used to love BC growing up.
That's right. Pete loves
and-
BC.
I did. So I came across this one, and I don't know if you remember the comic, but there was always a character named the Fat Broad, and that character no longer exists, or at least they've changed her name for politically correct reasons. But there's also
harsh.
another character, something I can't remember her name, but I came across they've eliminated her character too. It was something like the Hot Chick or something like that.
Sure.
And so the Fat Broad and the Hot Chick no longer exist in the BC land. But
it seems like you wouldn't have political correctness in BC.
That's true. That's a good.
You wouldn't really have a
It's
woke
BC,
crowd.
not
that's-
BC.
That's right.
Deep.
Yep. Exactly.
But anyway, I found one that includes the Fat Broad, and I'm going to get a little politically incorrect with this comic.
Okay.
So if you're offended, easily turn off your podcast and fast forward a little bit. But the Fat Broad comes up and talks to the guy. It's not BC, but it's his friend that's always in these comics. She says in the first panel, "I'm on a new diet." And he says, "Oh, really? How's it work?" And she says, "I can still eat the usual amount as long as I drink enough water to break down the fat." And then he is walking away and says, I think I'll go have one last look at Lake Erie.
That's pretty good.
Yes.
Uh,
I like that.
so there you go. There's your
Well played.
there's your politically incorrect BC.
Excellent.
BC. And so maybe I'm distracted by other things here too. Did you just look that up online, or where did you find your comic?
I looked it up online. I looked at.
Was it easy to find a whole bunch of BC cartoons?
Oh
There
yeah, I'm
were.
looking at a ton of them right now.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
There's a
I don't. You
ton
know,
of
if
'em.
you don't look, you don't know what's out there. But of course,
Right.
it's out there.
This was one that stood out. I just, it made me literally laugh out loud when I saw it.
You
So-
LOL'd.
I did
Lols.
LOL. So that's the BC one. So take it away, Gifford.
All right. So my next, I've got a couple for Garfield.
Oh yes.
So I'm gonna start with this one. For me, I mean, I'm not the Garfield aficionado that Brad is, of course, but my two favorite things in Garfield is the relationship between John and Garfield, and the relationship between Garfield and Odie. I love Odie. He's outstanding.
Odie's good shit.
Yes, he is. So the first one I have is between Garfield and John. So this first one is 7 panels. The first one is just Garfield sitting up at a counter with his hands crossed, or his front paws crossed at the counter. John runs up behind him, says, "Hey, Garfield, let's go do something." Big smile on his face. Garfield's expression does not change. He does not turn to look at John. The next panel, John with his finger up to his lips with eyes looking northward, thinking, "We could take a walk." Again, Garfield, no change in expression. John in the next one says, "Fly a kite." Again, Garfield, no change in his expression. John, getting a little more excited, leans in closer to Garfield. "We could learn to knit, plant a garden." Big smile on his face. Garfield, again, no change. The second to last panel is, again, Garfield has not moved this entire time. John is still standing behind Garfield, and now John is leaning in with just a disgusted look on his face. And the last panel, John says, "Or you could ignore everything I say." To which Garfield turns to him, smiles, and his thought bubble says, "Yeah, let's do that one." I mean, he's such a jerk to John.
But
He's
a
not
cat.
interested in doing much of anything, and he just loves digging on John.
He's your normal cat, though. That's all
right.
cats.
Yep. Yes, that is true. So again, like I say, I just love that relationship between those two. My second one for Garfield, this is Odie and Garfield. So not a lot of dialogue here, just 7 quick panels. The first one opens with Odie walking along, just happy as can be, tongue hanging out of his mouth, big smile on his face, eyes wide.
Always.
Second panel, he comes up on a full dish of food for Garfield. It's Garfield's dish. Next panel, he leans over and gives 3 quick sniffs to this food that's sitting there. The next panel, he breaks the 4th wall, looks directly out at the audience with this devilish grin, all teeth showing. He's got an idea. The next panel, he looks behind him, his eyes with a sly look, looking for anybody around. And while he's doing that, Garfield comes in from the other side in one fell swoop with his mouth wide open, lifts the dish and dumps all of his food down his mouth. Second to last panel, we come back to Odie. The dish is sitting there, now empty. And he's got this sad, confused look on his face. And the final panel, Odie again breaks the fourth wall, looking at the audience with this confused look on his face, and just says, "Burp."
Ha 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 ha.
Like he can't understand where the food went, so he's assuming he ate it. And
That's Odie for you.
Yes. So again, the dumbness of Odie is one of the things that I love, and Garfield always getting the better of him, usually anyway. So that was it for me.
All right, so I've got Garfield 2. I'm going to save it for last to break it up a little bit here. So the next book that I picked from my treasure trove, I have several Calvin and Hobbes books, one of the most amazing but shorter lived by comparison to some of these comics of all time. And I just remember reading
comic strips.
Yes. In high school over and over again, because these were so good, and they were so geared towards like a higher level, because there's like philosophy and stuff going on in these things, and so I loved them. And this book I have is a 10th anniversary version, and I'm not going to, get into all the stuff that's in here, but Bill Watterson has like written a lot of comments and forwards and stuff in here explaining the process and how he came up with the whole thing. So it's a really cool book. So it was one that it was nice to kind of revisit. There's also a documentary, by the way, on him just from a couple of years ago that I watched. It was quite popular. I can't think of the name of it, but I suppose if you just searched him up, you could easily find what it was called and find it.
And what was his name one more time for our audience?
Bill Watterson.
Uh-huh. Good old Bill.
With 2 T's. Watterson with 2 T's.
So
I have
you got to accentuate that.
So I have a few different ones I picked out here that I thought, again, I tried to pick these ones that I thought were funny and good, but also kind of summed up the essence of these strips. And so the first one is just kind of, this is cute because Calvin has lost Hobbes. He doesn't know where he is. So if you don't know, okay, wait a minute, we should back up. Calvin and Hobbes is about this little boy. You've probably seen him pissing on things on people's trucks because it's ridiculous decals. But he has this pet tiger who's a stuffed animal that is always a stuffed animal around everybody else, but is alive and walks and talks with him when he's with Calvin. And Calvin has this amazing imagination. There's so many different things he does with it, but Hobbes being like the crown jewel. So this one starts, and the other thing I was going to say is I noticed as I was reading this, and I remember this now from reading these books, but like, these came out daily, but these comics told a story. Like they would go on for days. Mm-hmm. And so you'd have to read it every day to keep up with what was going on, which I think is cool too. And so I can't, some of these I can't go through the whole thing, or I'll just kind of summarize them, but there'll be multiple days worth. So the first one shows Calvin sitting at a desk. He's writing, and it shows what he's writing on his paper. It says, "Lost, my tiger, Hobbes." And then his mom comes in and looks over his shoulder and says, "Maybe you should describe him." And so this is what he writes. It's because you can, it's, of course, the nice thing about comics is they show you this is writing, not speaking. He said, "On the quiet side, somewhat peculiar, a good companion in a weird sort of way." And then she goes, "I mean, what does he look like?" And Calvin just says, "Oh." I mean, and that's the end of that one. But it's not the end of the story. But even just for a day, that's funny. It's, because the joke is actually the third one. It's the ridiculous description that this little boy has. Mm-hmm. But then it ends there. I'll just kind of summarize through here. So, because I'm going to read one more. It's his friend, or not friend, this girl he hates named Susie Durkins. She had found him, and she has him. And so Calvin's out looking for him, and he meets Susie, and he says, "Have you seen him?" And she says, "Would you like to join a tea party?" And he says, "Heck no, I'm trying to find my best friend who's been kidnapped by a dog. Leave me alone." And then in the next panel, we see the other side of the wall, and she's sitting having a tea party with Calvin, and she said, with Hobbes. Sorry.
Hobbes, yep.
"Well, I think Mr. Calvin is very rude, don't you, Mr. Tiger?" "Yes, I think so too. More tea, anyone?" And that one's just funny because he's right there, but she's having fun with Hobbes. He finally gets her back, and so anyway, that's a whole fun little story that went on for like a week. of that one. And Calvin loves Hobbes, and when he loses him, he's panicked. It's a really big deal, and so that's part of that being a kid. This next one I like because I'm a teacher, and so we see a lot of parts where Calvin's at school. So he's doing a report on bats, and again, it goes on for days, but I'll just read this one here. So the first panel shows him and Hobbes, and he says, "I think we've got enough information now, don't you?" And Hobbes says, "All we have is one fact that you made up." And in the next one, it's just Calvin, and he says, "That's plenty. By the time we add an introduction, a few illustrations, and a conclusion, it will look just like a graduate thesis." Which is how kids think.
Right.
Then he says, "Besides, I've got a secret weapon that will guarantee me a good grade. No teacher can resist this." And Hobbes looks at him and says, "What is it?" And then we get to the last one, and he goes, "A clear plastic binder. Pretty professional looking, eh?" And Hobbes rolls his eyes and says, "I don't want co-author credit on this, okay?" Because basically the only thing that he wrote down about bats is that they fly, and he kept calling them bugs.
Oh.
And everybody makes fun of him because bats aren't bugs.
No.
All right. There's another one. He finds a box. I'm not going to read all this one, but he finds a box, and then this is where the imagination comes in. He calls it a transmogrifier, and you can go in there, and he comes out as something else. But he'll come out as something else, and then he'll act like that thing. And in the picture, it'll show him as that thing, but he'll go to his parents, and they're just think he's crazy because it's Calvin standing there, but he thinks that they see him as this other thing, and his imagination is great. And in this one, he turned it on its side and called it a duplicator. And so they were going to duplicate things, and that led to a whole series of good things. But I'm going to just skip through that instead of reading one of those because I don't want to take too much time. I've got one or two more, and then I'll be done.
I love it.
All right. This is a good one. Again, it shows kind of his lack of imagination. So they're in bed, and they're trying to go to sleep. And Calvin says to Hobbes, "Mom wants me to try an experiment tonight." Next one, he says, "She says the monsters under my bed may need me to think about them to exist." In the next one, he's talking, and Hobbes has his hand up to his chin like he's thinking about what he's saying. Calvin says, "Her theory is that if I just don't think about them, they'll go away." And in the last one, Hobbes says, "Of course, that idea of being dragged under the bed and devoured by monsters has a way of gripping the mind." But then the punchline here is Calvin says, "Yeah, and it's not like Mom and Dad go away when I stop thinking about them."
Wow.
But see, he puts it together.
Uh-huh.
All right, this is my last one.
Okay.
And the little note under this one is from Bill Watterson that says, "It's sometimes sort of frightening where my mind will go if I let it." So this one is Hobbes and Calvin carrying bowls of cereal. And Calvin says, "The more you think about things, the weirder they seem." Second panel, he says, "Take this milk. Why do we drink cow milk?" Third panel, it's Calvin. He's got his one eye shut, and he's squeezing his hands together. And he says, "Who was the guy who first looked at a cow and said, 'I think I'll drink whatever comes out of these things when I squeeze them'?" And then in the last one, he's just smiling, and he says, "Isn't that weird?" And Hobbes is walking away and says, "I think conversation should be kept to a minimum until afternoon." I really wanted to find one where he built snowmen. Those are most of my favorites.
Yes,
but I
those
didn't
are
find
good,
a good
yes.
one in here. But you can go find a snowman Calvin one because those are fantastic.
Lovely.
I love the relationship between the two. Calvin is a true kid and a little rascal, but he talks with big words and smart. And there's just so many great strips that make you think at the same time. And it's one of those things that has levels.
I like it.
That's why a kid can read it and like it, but I was in high school when I was loving it, and adults can love it just as much.
I should go back and read some of those. I haven't read those since probably high school.
Mhm.
Are you done finally?
I'm done. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's hard to pick.
I'm joking.
It's
It was
good
good.
stuff.
It was well done.
Yeah.
So I do want to run down first before I get into this next one. When I said earlier, BC was my favorite comic strip. I'm talking about as a younger kid, because there was only, I think, 5 comics that were standard in the Marshall paper that we got in Marshall,
Yeah.
Minnesota.
That's true. There weren't very
It
many.
was Blondie, in this order. I think it was Blondie, BC, Beetle Bailey, Hager the Horrible, and then Peanuts was always
That's probably
last.
about right.
Yeah, I think
That's how-
because I think Garfield wasn't in there,
No.
which always just blew my
Right.
mind.
But right, and if I remember correctly, that's what it was when we were younger. But then they added a few as we got older, and the all-time favorite comic strip, always a one panel, but it always most consistently made me laugh more than any others. And at times it would just put me in tears. And I had these books, and I wish I still had them, because I guarantee you I'd have a great time going back. I am talking about The Far Side.
Yes. Well done.
Gary Larson.
The
just
Far
for
Side.
whatever reason, they just always hit me. So there's 2 actually that stand out. The one that it's just so stupid, it's funny. I'm sure everyone's seen it online and everything. But do you guys remember the Midvale School for the Gifted one?
That's
Yes.
one of mine. I was bringing it up
Where
later.
he's pushing
yes.
the pull door.
Yep.
Yeah.
But he's leaning all up against it.
He's just pushing with both
Leaning
hands
hard
on the door,
Yep.
right on the pull sign.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And School for the Gifted. It's just so good.
Yeah. Oh my God. I
Classic.
remember seeing that for the first time, and I just laughed for about a half an hour, just in tears, so hard, laughing at it. The other one that I did find that I thought was pretty funny, not quite as funny as that one, but it's a Far Side cartoon. The caption says, "Donning his new canine decoder, Professor Schwartzman becomes the first human being on Earth to hear what barking dogs are actually saying." So then the panel has this scientist walking through the street with this big machine on his head, and so he can hear what the dogs are saying. And then all the dogs are just saying, "Hey, hey, 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 hey." One of the backgrounds going, "Hey."
Those would be the best ones that we could really do all night.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to have a few for you as well when Pete is done with his round here.
Great.
That's concludes mine. So take it.
All right. So you took my Midvale School for the Gifted. So I remembered one that I was looking at the other night, so I'm going to add that one into my stuff here. So.
And there's just something about cows hanging out and standing on 2 feet and talking that it's just funny.
Right.
It was his
And that's what you
trademark thing.
get in The Far Side.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, and just
Or
all
deer,
around.
any animal.
Right. So I am going to start with this one here. Again, just one panel, as they all are. So we have a crowd gathered in front of a hangman's noose. And we've got a guy in the
He's
noose.
already laughing.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry. Hangman's nooses always make me laugh, I guess.
They do.
No,
and we've
they
got,
don't. They don't, by the way. I want to make that clear. They are not funny. Go ahead.
So we've got the sheriff standing in front of the man who's got his neck in the noose, and he's got a piece of paper, obviously reading him, maybe what he did, to get here. And then we have the executioner standing behind with his hood on. And you see one woman out in the crowd with her hand up. Excuse me. And the executioner has his hand up, and in the thought bubble, it just says, "Okay, Mom, I see you. I see you." So that was one I put in there. Then the other one that I remembered, quick change here. So again, speaking of animals on their hind legs. So what we have is a scene in a forest, and there's a bunch of bears, and they're all standing around, and they're standing in front of a coffin with a wreath in front of the coffin. And there's another bear that is sitting up out of the coffin. And the caption reads, "For crying out loud, I was hibernating. Don't you guys ever check for a pulse?"
I love it. See, and I was hoping I had a Far Side book downstairs, but that's one that I just don't have, and I don't know why.
I think I
Because I've
had
read
a
plenty
Far
of books,
Side-
but I must have borrowed them from Pete or somebody else.
Yeah, I think I had a Far
Probably.
Side book growing up, and just so many great things in there with Far Side. I spent a lot of time combing through Peanuts, Garfield, and Far Side, probably the most on Far Side, just laughing and trying to find one, like two that really stuck out to me. But
Well,
those were
great choices.
those are excellent.
Both of you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll finish my last one. I'll try to go quick here, but we're on to my favorite of all time, which is the old Garfield. So like I said, I got like 40 of these books downstairs, so I didn't know which one to pick. I grabbed his 8th book because I remember reading it as a kid, like all the early ones, of course. But this one came out in March of 1984, so I kind of thought that's probably around the time, or maybe I really started reading the books and getting all of them. So I picked about 4 or 5. These are really quick ones. But I wanted to pick ones that showed Garfield like you did, but I wanted to find some that showed Garfield introduced me to a lot of like words and things that aren't for a kid that like you wouldn't know. And I always thought that was kind of an interesting contrast because it's kind of a dumb cartoon and some people love it like me, but I think some people think it's pretty stupid. But it actually does have things that as a kid I learned some things and like picked up on some things. So this first one, we know Garfield likes to eat, right?
Yes.
He's sitting by his dinner dish. It's empty. He's rubbing his belly, and he just says, "Oh boy, do I love food." In the second one, he's laying flat on his back. He says, "If I couldn't eat food, I'd just die." And then in the third one, he's still lying on his back, and he says, "Sage, Garfield, sage." And I just thought the word sage, like, a kid doesn't know that. That's
right.
But you pick up on it. And I think it's funny, too, because it's such an obvious thing to say. We all know he loves it. So it's like, It's the irony in using that word there. All right. My next one is one of the 2-line, a little longer one, but it's, well, we'll get to it in a second. So in the first one, you see off in the distance, it says, "Wham, wham." And Garfield is walking through the front door outside down the stairs. And he just says, "I don't like the sound of this." So he gets out there, and there's John holding a hammer above a completed, pretty crappy little house with nails hanging out everywhere. And he says, "Surprise, Garfield." And Garfield says, "What have we here?" Then in the third one, John says, "We now have 2 houses, a big one and this little one." And here's another one. Garfield says, "A regular Taj Mahal." In the fourth one, John says, "One of us is going to live in the big house, and one of us is going to live in the little house." And Garfield just looks at him and goes, "That's fine with me." And then the 5th panel is like a doubly long one, showing the house all the way over to the front door. And on the left side, it's the house, and it's just John's feet sticking out of it. And Garfield is walking back up the stairs, and he says, "You may visit me in the big house on weekends." And I love that one because it shows Garfield always getting his way and tormenting John. All right, this next one is Garfield and Nermal. You guys know Nermal?
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
So Nermal is the cat that Garfield hates because Nermal is so cute, and everybody loves Nermal. And Nermal just basically comes in and kind of antagonizes him. So in the first panel, Nermal is looking up at Garfield with his usual big eyes, and he says, "Tell me, Garfield, are you threatened by the fact that I am much younger and cuter than you are?" Garfield looks down at him and says, "I'm bigger than that." Nermal, with her eyes closed, smiling, says, "You can say that again." And then in the final one, we see Garfield with his arms swinging, and Nermal is flying through the air. And he says, "See how they like your rapier wit on the moon."
Nice. The rapier wit.
I had no idea what rapier meant, and it was great.
Yeah, neither did Lloyd Christmas with his rapist wit.
Rapist wit. All right, I got 1 or 2 more. This next one is Garfield finding a hat, and it's kind of this childish beanie hat with a long bill on it. Mm-hmm. So in the first one, he's holding the hat, and he looks at it, he says, "I wonder what kind of hat this is." The second one, it's just a close-up of Garfield putting the hat on. It's like over his eyes. Third one, he says, "What time's that bus leaving for Topeka?" wearing the hat. Fourth one, he says, "See ya, Mom. Billy Bob and me are going to play in traffic." Fourth one, still with the hat on. "Gee, I'd love to go to the cotillion." There's another one.
Uh-huh.
"But I got to stay home and watch arm wrestling on TV." In the fifth one, he takes the hat off and looks at it again. And he says, "That's it. This must be one of those stupid hats." And I thought that was funny. And that's my last one. I'll spare you anymore. But those I thought showed the humor. They made me laugh. They show Garfield and John. But most of those had like this word or phrase in it that like is not like for a kid, that a kid wouldn't know. And that was one of the things I loved about it. Actually, the one other cartoon I was going to read, but it really doesn't do it justice. He puts on these glasses. And in the second panel, everything's just all these wacky pictures and off center and like weird. And in the third one, he takes them off and he says, "Pablo Picasso's." Because it looked like a Picasso.
Yes.
But as a kid, I didn't know what that meant either. I thought the word Pablo was like some weird way of pronouncing probably. I had no idea what was going on.
Sure.
But now I get it.
I'm going to use that one
like
from
a
now
Picasso
on.
painting,
Pablo.
and it's just this random, weird thing. All right, I am done. I'm sorry. But
No,
you gave
that
me a
was all
homework that I
good
loved.
stuff.
Pete.
Good.
Yeah,
I'm glad
this
you
was
enjoyed
fun.
it. I hope the listeners are enjoying this as much as we are. I did have to, my last one that I have in the category of so stupid, how did this ever even get printed? I know Brad is a huge Beetle Bailey fan. So I found one that I looked at this one and I'm like, how in the hell did this even get printed? And I didn't check the date on it. I think it's actually, if I zoom in, it's like 1963 or something.
Mhm.
But it's a one long panel Beetle Bailey cartoon. And so you have, they're showing all of the guys in the barracks. One appears to be making coffee. The others are sweeping. One is mopping. One is doing the laundry. One is changing the pillowcase. One is ironing. And Beetle Bailey is sewing. And you have Sarge at the door saying, "Would anyone like to arrange flowers for the officers' banquet tonight?" And Beetle Bailey is saying, "Heck no, that's women's work." That's the whole thing.
That's the whole
Yeah,
thing.
that's
My
the joke.
God.
That Mort Walker really had it going on.
Get a real pulse on
It's
things.
like, what the hell? And I guarantee you, some of them, the Beetle Bailey ones, I remember thinking some of them were funny, but I'm sure if I were to go back and like read all of them, 95% of them would be like that dumb.
There's no way in hell they're funny. Those are stupid.
Hager
It's
the
those
Horrible
and
was
Hager the
under the
Horrible.
same
They're like the
thing.
same thing.
Yeah. But it was what it was, and so I read every one of them. What I couldn't stand though was those stupid serious cartoons. Do you remember those?
Yeah.
Like
where they were just
soap
telling
opera?
a story, and I
Yeah.
hated those.
Yep.
Yeah, they're always in the Sunday paper. What was the name? I wish I could think of the name of the one.
Doonesbury, is that one?
Yeah,
the one?
Doonesbury would be one.
No, Doonesbury was kind of funny sometimes. I'm
Was it?
talking about
How
one
about
with
those?
that was
yeah,
just
I know which one you're thinking of exactly. Because
Was
it
it
looked almost
Judge
like
something?
a comic book type thing, and it
Yeah.
had close-ups of like adult people. I mean, it's just dumb.
yeah. It's like, what's this even doing here? Was it Judge something? I don't
Not the one I'm thinking of, but maybe. I don't know. I don't remember.
So there you go, Gifford. What else you got for us? Is
Those-
that it
those-
for everybody?
Yeah, we're
Those
done.
are my three that I
Everybody's
did.
done.
Yeah,
I did
top
my
5.
Peanuts, Garfield, and Far Side. Yep.
I hope that
All right.
people enjoyed it because it was fun to listen to for me. Even your
Yeah.
guys is like, picturing, thinking.
Yep.
Well
Yes, a
done,
very
everybody.
visual. And maybe what we'll have to do, Brad, if you'd be willing to post to Twitter or Instagram, I could send you the screenshots of my panels, and we could post those maybe the
can
week
post to Twitter, but yes, I thought we would post some of these probably.
All right, that sounds
Just-
wonderful. Add a little
Yes.
visual to the audio for those that that listen. And remember, you can always follow us what is our Twitter handle?
At Pop Yearbook.
At Pop
At
Yearbook
Pop
on
Yearbook.
Twitter. And how about Insta?
At Pop Yearbook.
At Pop Yearbook. Seems like there's a theme.
But we're
here.
not done here yet anyway.
No.
But
But
we're not done.
just adding that in there.
Yes.
Throwing
Please
a
do.
little mid-episode advertising.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think we're almost done, but
yeah.
Now back to the show.
All right, now Pop Culture Yearbook, sponsored by Pop Culture Yearbook.
Brilliant.
All right, let's go to Gifford, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our top 5, and you can throw honorable mentions in too.
Sure.
But your top 5 favorite comic strips
Sure.
of all time.
All right. Well, I did do my 5. So my number 5, again, these are the ones that we see in the Marshall paper growing up. So my number 5 is BC. Number 4, I went with Hager, the Horrible. And number 3 was Peanuts. And
Hager,
then
the Horrible.
I liked Hager. And then I went to Peanuts, and then Garfield for 2 and Far Side for 1. So that's why I picked strips from my top 3.
All right.
Go ahead.
So I guess I do have one honorable mention. It's kind of in the realm of like the Hager the Horrible, because some of those are written by like brothers, and I can't remember which ones. But there's one comic strip that when I read the paper, I used to read it every day, and I don't know why exactly. It must have been something about the look of it just drew me in. Because sometimes it could be okay, but it really wasn't very funny or anything. But I read High and Lois for years.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
And
Yeah.
it's okay. It's harmless.
it can
Right.
be funny.
For my 5, I have a tie because
You're Brad.
it would have been Dilbert, and I
Ah.
still there was a time where Dilbert was hilarious. We all loved it. I have several books downstairs of that too. But at one point, I kept reading it every day, and at one point, I'm like, this is just dumb, and I quit reading it. And now Scott Adams is like this insane mega guy that I can't. I mean, he's crazy. So I'm done with Dilbert, but it was really great at one point, and I loved it at one point.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I tied it with another one that's it's a classic, but it's not like a great comic. But I do love Blondie. I got nothing against Blondie. Dagwood,
Sure.
It's good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then my top 4, you can probably imagine from what we've done here. Number 4, I have The Far Side. Number 3, The Peanuts. Number 2, Calvin and Hobbes. And Garfield, always number 1 in my heart.
Yes. Well, and I did want to add with Garfield here. While I was in college, I did have a poster of Garfield. I think everybody knows it, where he's standing there with his arms stretched wide, and it says, "It's hard to be serious when you're naked."
Yeah, that's a good one. I still have 1 or 2 of those hanging in my classroom too that I just can't take away because it's Garfield.
Yeah, he's the best.
All right. Well, good segue, because my number 5 on my list is Garfield.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, Brad. I know that you wish it was a little higher, but
He made everybody's top
For
5
my
for
life.
crying out loud. That's pretty good.
That's right. My number 4 was Peanuts.
Wow,
My
this is
number
interesting.
3, Peanuts was just good, and it was sort of like comfort. It's
Yes.
a comfort
Yes.
comic. But it wasn't always as funny as some of the other ones, right? And so that's why it was number 4.
I get it.
I mean, it's probably the best of all time, when you consider the whole thing. But my number 3, which I've talked about, is BC. My number 2 was Dilbert, and I actually think exact same things as you, Brad. And it might hit me a little different because I actually have always worked in that kind of office setting. And so some of the jokes like that people that haven't worked in that setting might not get, but I get most of them because of that. I also actually think when you think back, like there is so much Dilbert merchandise.
Yeah,
and
it was
everything.
huge.
I
There was a
believe
TV show.
that-
Remember that?
Yep, I remember
Very
that. and
short-lived. I tried to watch it. I still liked it at that time too.
I actually wonder if the success of Dilbert played a role in shows like The Office and the movie Office Space. I feel like it was in kind of that same vein, and that might have helped push those things along. I don't know, but it seems like that it might have been an influence because Dilbert was so popular for many years before those shows even came out.
Well, Mike
Right.
Judge was writing Office Space like shorts for SNL back in the early 90s, so he did already.
Okay.
I mean, there might have been a connect cross where they, but that did
influence,
actually
right?
go back. It was just called Milton, was his original comic,
Right.
Oh, really? Okay.
yeah,
Before
and it
Office
went
Space.
back for years before the movie.
All right. And my number one was Far Side, which
There you
I've
go.
already called out. So
You can't argue with that. That cartoon is
you
just
can't. It's just
brilliant.
always
So easy to
even
read.
the ones. Yeah, exactly. It's like didn't have the depth like Calvin and Hobbes. It just like
Nope.
you read it and boom.
Well,
you're
it's one
done, and
panel.
it's
You just
hilarious.
pack. You
Yes,
pack everything into one panel. Yeah, and it's
that's
so
right.
off
But he
kilter.
just did it so perfectly.
Yeah. Well, and
So-
like I was reading through them the other night, and some of it reminds me of one of them in particular reminded me of like Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy.
Yeah.
And the cartoon was these two very dim-witted looking brothers out in a field, and they've got a bear cub like up above their heads, and they're like playing with it. And in the background, you can see the mother grizzly, and along the bottom, it just said, "And the Larson brothers were never heard from again." And there was something in there, like with Jack Handy, where he had a run-in with a bear or something, and I can't remember how
That's a good comparison.
Yeah, there's just it was so off kilter
That's not bad.
and funny and biting. So yeah, I enjoyed Far Side quite a bit.
And that's
Different.
another
You know
one
who
that was
else?
just
Oh.
short-lived too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, compared to
Almost kind of like this secret, hard to find at times. Like,
And now,
Well,
Gary Larson is no longer with us now.
Yeah.
I think he died 10 or 15 years ago,
I don't remember.
maybe something
I'm
like that.
not sure, but I
think
know
he's alive.
he's
'Cause didn't Bill Watterson die too?
talking about a lot of
Maybe.
dead dudes.
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on that one. But
Well,
That's
and
nice.
I know that one comic strip I would have loved to have seen at one point would have been The Pool Boy. If there could have been a comic strip called The Pool Boy, the drummer from Preacher
the
Row.
drummer with a dream.
Yes, it
Oh,
would have
yes.
been outstanding and would have been very funny. So
That was fun, Pete.
Yes, very much so.
Yes,
Way to switch
I
it up.
loved it. All
And
right,
more.
we're gonna be back next week.
Yes,
Yeah.
Pablo.
Back to a movie.
Pablo.
Little
Yeah,
more
will Pablo be
tradition.
back?
Pablo.
Will Pablo be back?
Yes, exactly.
All right, here we are at the end of the show.
Let's go,
Preacher
Preacher Row.
Okay, bye everybody.
Thanks for
Bye.
listening.
Standing on my own 2 feet. No one's here to comfort me. Sorry for what I have done. Sorry that your son is gone. 7 steps and it will be my last. And start to me on my back. I turn and I look to you. I'm scared but there's nothing I can do.